Hi everyone, and welcome back to another tutorial. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to onboard a firewall threat defense virtual appliance FTDv version 7.4.1 onto the firewall management center virtual appliance 7.4.1. There are three major steps to this configuration or this tutorial. The first step is we will configure the FTDv using the CLI, right, to register to a firewall management center version 7.4.1, right? So that's the first step. After we do that on the command line of the FTD, we'll then head over to the FMC web interface to add the device, right? The FTD 7.4.1 device, right? Once that's done, I'll show you how to configure a basic security policy from scratch so that the firewall can start to perform its duty. Okay, now let's hop over to the FTDv command line. So I have a new firewall threat defense virtual appliance freshly installed. So you're gonna log in using the default username and the default password, which is admin123 capital A DIM123. Now when you first log in, you'll prompt you to read the EULA and accept it. So I'm gonna acknowledge and accept the agreement. Once it's done, for security reason, you will be prompted to change the default password. Once you do that, the configuration or the network configuration wizard will kick in. So you just need to go through the configuration. You can look at my previous video to see how you configure that. We're going to configure IPv4. We're not going to configure IPv6. We'll do the IP address manually. I've assigned a management VLAN for this setup. So let's give it an IP address. So I'm going to use .44 class C subnet. Default gateway is .1 FTDv 741-release 172-001 is the host name. We'll use the umbrella DNS. We're not going to have a search domain. Takes a couple of seconds to apply the network setup. So we're configuring the management interface in this case. Okay, this is the important part, right? If you missed my previous video, to manage the firewall threat defense using the firewall device manager, which is a standalone built-in on device management, you select yes. But for our case, we're going to choose no, since we're going to manage the FTD using a centralized firewall management center. So make sure you select no. Okay, for this tutorial, we're going to use firewall mode, which is routed. So we're going to hit enter. Once this is done, because we selected the management to be remote or through a centralized management center, it will actually give you the steps to configure the FTDv. So the key step that you want to take note is actually this, right? Configure to add the manager, right? And the registration key. Now, the value that you might want to add in is also the net ID if your firewall is sitting behind a net, right? So that the communications can occur and the FMC is able to identify the firewall. Alright, so we're going to combine these two into a single step. Right, so let's do this. Configure manager, add This is the host of the firewall management center, which is 10.76.0.40 is my FMC address, right? So do take note of that. And then the registration key, this is set by you, so FTDv. So I'm going to set a to FMCv741. Okay, so make sure you remember this because you will need it for the step 2 to configure the FMC. Right, and then we will give it a net ID 001, right? So specify a unique net ID for the device that you're going to add through behind a firewall. Now, even if you don't have a firewall in between, it's always good to add the net ID, right? Just in case you decide to put the firewall through a net translation later. Okay, hit enter. You can see that the configuration is successful. So we have configured the firewall threat defense, right, to try and register itself with the firewall management center. Now let's hop over to the firewall management center. Okay, let's go to admin. You can see mine is 76.0.40, and then log in to the web management. Okay, now when you first log in, what you want to do is go to device and then choose device management. And then click on add device. Okay, the host here is the IP address of the FTD that you're going to add, right, which is 0. Did I specify 44 if I'm not wrong, and then give it a name, then registration key. So remember your registration key that you've configured or assigned during the setup. You can check the key demo FTDv to FMCv741. Okay. Now default, when it's a brand new install, there will not be any policy. So you want to do is create a new policy, default. Access policy, and we can set the default policy to block all traffic. Okay, now since mine is a FTD virtual appliance, I will need to specify the, not carrier, sorry, the performance here as well as the function that I'm going to add, right? And then let's put in the ID 001 and then click register. Okay, this is step 2, right? So this step will allow you to register the FTD that you have just configured earlier on to the firewall management center. Okay, took a while for the message to come out. Now if you go to task, you can see that okay, registration has happened, started discovery, which is good, right? When you see this, it means that the communication has been established and it's discovering the device. Now, if I come back here and do a show manager, we should see that the registration is completed, right? So when you see this, it means that the FTDv has completed its registration with the firewall management center, right? And right now the firewall management center is discovering the protocol of the device and the configuration, right? It takes a while, a couple of minutes for all these things to complete, but this will complete step 1 and step 2 of this tutorial. Once this is done, we will go on and proceed to configure the basic security policy. Okay, once the deployment is done, you should see a green icon here and you shouldn't see any alerts or critical stuff, right? So let's go in and take a look. Right, you can click on this edit on the pencil sign to look at what has been configured, right? So by default, right, a blank configuration, you'll see that on the FTD, there's nothing much configured except for the management interface, right? So first, what we want to do is to configure the interfaces, right? So let's configure the outside interface. Let's just go to gigabit Ethernet 0/0. Let's put the name outside. We can enable the device, the interface now or later, right? Connection to WAN, right? Security zone by default, I've already created some, but it should be blank when you first start. So let's do this outside zone. Okay, create a new zone called outside zone. For the IP address, let's use static IP address for my testing. 9. Okay, let me see. 143.180.175. Right. Class C. Okay, you can leave the rest of the configuration blank, right? So we're gonna just configure the outside interface and then give it a public IP address. Okay. Alright. Remember to save the configuration once it's done. So we're gonna add a inside interface as well for the LAN. Okay. Enable the connection. Connected to local area network. Security zone. We're gonna create a new zone called inside zone. Now, having a consistent naming convention is important because then that allows you to reuse the policy later. So just take note on how your naming convention for the internal or your company policy. Now I'm going to set this to 10.77.1. If we can do 11, right? I'm going to give my default gateway that .11 as my default gateway for the LAN, and then click OK. Okay, once that's done, let's save the setup. Now, unlike the FDM, when you do the wizard, a lot of this is prompted, but if you're using the FMC, you will need to configure all this configuration manually. It's not difficult. It's pretty much straightforward. Once the interface is done, what we're going to do is to configure the routing. Click on routing, go to static route. We want to set a default route to the internet. Right? You can use the rest of OSPF, RIP, EIGRP, protocol depending on your company's setup. So we're gonna add a static route, right? The route will go through the outside interface, and then we'll allow any IP address that is allowed to go through the gateway. Now let's create a default gateway. So by default, you won't see the default gateway. Default gateway. This is when 1, right? 79.143.180.1 is the default gateway. Okay, so the name, right? You need to have a hyphen or underscore in between. Let's just give it a hyphen. Okay, click on save. Okay, it's done. Click on OK. Alright, so we have a default route of any IP address that is allowed going through the firewall to be routed through the outside interface through the default gateway we have configured. Then save the config. Okay, so you can deploy it now, the partial configuration, or you can deploy it later. We're going to deploy it now. So that's the configuration that you need to do on the device itself. Next, what we do is to create a net, right, or a pet, so that we can do port address translation for all the IP address going through the firewall to be netted or petted through the outside interface. Now I'm going to create a new policy, right? This is a threat defense net policy, right? We can do a default okay, net rule for outside, net inside to outside. Okay, allow port address translation to outside. Okay, then we are going to apply this to the FTD and then save it. Okay, now we need to add a rule, right? Once you have a policy, we want to add a auto net rule. Should be a dynamic rules whereby it will allow okay, let's do a name any IPv4 from LAN network. You can do a narrow route down of the specific network, or I mean we can allow anything that comes in to be netted through, right? So save this. Okay, once you create all the objects, you can reuse them later. Now source, we're going to use the destination interface IP, so we're going to do a port address translation for any other IP coming in, going out through the outside to be netted through the outside interface. Now that's done, we want to allow the interface object, we want to allow sources inside, destination is outside. Okay, then let's okay, sorry, it's inside zone to outside zone. Okay, yeah, I need to tidy up some of this. Oh, sorry. So inside zone is the source, outside zone is the destination. Oops, wrong. Okay, inside zone to outside zone, click OK. So you see that there's AutoNet rule right here that allows you to configure. And leave the pool and the rest as it is. Okay. Okay, save the configuration. So once you configure the net, right, it allows you to do network address translation, or in our case, port address translation. We need to now create a policy, right? Let's create a new policy, allow inside zone to outside zone. Okay, add this in, save this. It's warning you that you're moving the firewall from one default access policy to the current ones, click on yes. You can change the default policy, but I would like to create different policies for different testing. So once you create a policy, you see there's no rules inside. What you want to do is to add a rule. So default rule is deny, right? So we're going to allow, create the first allow rule, right? Allow inside zone to outside zone. Okay, so source inside zone, destination outside zone. We're gonna allow this, right? And then let's click apply. Okay, so save the configuration. Once that's done, let's deploy. Right, remember you configure the configuration on the FMC. Now you need to deploy the configuration down to the FTD. So we're gonna let it deploy. Okay, and then let's hop over to my client machine. Might need to change IP address. Okay, oops, let's release this. Okay, make sure my network setting is correct. Okay, DHCP, that's right. Okay. Let's see whether we can. Oops, I don't remember configuring DHCP. Let's go back to my configuration again. Okay, so deployment is completed. Now I forgot a important step, right? Especially useful for branch officers. Okay, let's go back to the device. Okay, we did not, or I did not set up the DHCP scope. Right, so if you are going to have a separate, or if you're going to use a firewall as a DHCP server, you need to come over to the device and then hop over the DHCP. Right, so first let's add a DNS server. Right, let's just add umbrella DNS server 1. This is 222 server. 208.67.222.222. Okay, save this. Okay, we have the DNS server. Let's add the DHCP server. Select the interface. We're gonna have the inside. The IP address is .1.2.1.1.2 and .77.1.222. Okay. Enable DHCP server. Click OK. Save the configuration. Then deploy it. Okay, let's deploy it and let it finish. Okay, it's completed. Let's hop back to my client machine. Yeah, sometimes the IP config does has a bit of challenge. Let me just close this and network settings again. Enable and hope it does. Okay. Let me check the configuration to make sure that the machine is connected to the right network. Let's try again. Okay, now we're getting the IP address from DHCP. Let's make sure I can ping. Okay, I can ping the firewall. Let's see if I can ping out of the firewall. And you can see that I'm able to access the firewall, access the internet through IP address. Complete the setup later. And was able to access the internet, right, from my client machine. Okay, so that's all. Oops, did I change something? Let's close this to make sure that. Okay, DHCP is configured. That's enabled, so that's good. Okay, so that's all there is to configure or to onboard the FTDv into the firewall management center so that you can do centralized management, right? Um, Hope this tutorial has been useful. Stay tuned for more tutorial like this in the future. Thank you for watching. Take care and stay safe.